People who have worked with him find him narcissistic. He's kind of addicted to being in the spotlight, attention-seeking person, a bit of a ham actor.
There has been a deadline set for Justin Trudeau. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's Dave, and today's top story, Trudeau's caucus has revolted. We're talking 24 people went up to the mic. They had their 3-hour caucus meeting. Apparently Justin Trudeau was sobbing and crying a bit about his kids and how it's been so hard. All those F Trudeau flags, I guess that's really gotten to Trudeau. So keep it up, folks. Yeah, we've got numerous interviews here. There's a lot of information to get through, so let's get into this. So first off, we got a clip here of Captain Cpac coming out of the caucus, the 3-hour caucus meeting.
Shotgun if we can there. Justin Trudeau.
The Liberal Party is strong and united.
Yeah, so he said the Liberal Party is strong and united, which means the opposite. It is divided and is weak. Okay. And we got Mr. Mark Holland here with his fresh kicks, really professional. Here's what he had to say.
We're absolutely on the same page. Pierre Poilievre has to be stopped. He's an existential threat to this country. There's not a Liberal who doesn't disagree with that. I think everybody who's speaking is speaking from that place. And I certainly feel an enormous amount of unity in the caucus. I think...
Okay, that's a load of bullcrap.
Lasted more than 3 hours. Sources tell CTV no letter was presented and there was no list of names. But some MPs did go to the mic to speak about leadership change.
This is the first time we're actually discussing this issue. So this will be a full conversation.
This isn't a code red situation, and the Prime Minister can sure as hell handle the truth. And what was happening there, although it will remain confidential, is really about MPs telling the Prime Minister the truth.
I believe Justin Trudeau will be leading the next election. So thank you.
What Mr. Poilievre would do to this country is the type of thing that keeps us all up at night. And I have a lot of pride in a caucus that's willing to have tough conversations. I think that's profoundly democratic.
These boneheads don't represent Canadians at all. They just represent their own bank accounts. So jumping over to the CBC now, they have the full insight on this.
We're going to begin today on that Liberal caucus meeting. We're learning more and more about what went down behind closed doors, including a deadline for Justin Trudeau to decide if he'll stay on as Liberal leader. We hear Patrick Weiler got things started. What do you know?
Yeah, well, in fact, the Prime Minister really got things started, David, according to sources, and we've all been speaking to folks who were inside the room, told his MPs this has been such a difficult time. He actually got emotional talking to MPs about the F Trudeau flags and the impact that's having on his children, saying, you know, it's their last name too. Spoke about the need for party unity, saying that Liberals lose when they're not united. So sort of made that push. Then it was time for him to listen. As you say, our sources tell us that the first MP up to the mic was Vancouver MP Patrick Weiler. He read this letter aloud that we've been hearing so much about, the letter that says it's time, Prime Minister, for you to go, and setting a deadline, too, saying that by Monday, the Prime Minister has to decide what he is going to do. They were told that the letter was signed by 24 people. MPs did not get a copy of that letter. And in fact, we still don't know, and members of caucus don't know exactly who signed it, although some names have become public.
So that deadline they set, if you watch the whole thing, this is a full 1-hour episode. We're not going to go through a full hour because they got a bunch of boneheads on here. We'll go through another 6 minutes of this. That's just pretty interesting. That deadline, the CBC did not want to admit what that really meant. We'll get into this, and I'll break it down with the numbers and the seats and everything, but the deadline, I think, is pretty important.
Now, it didn't end with the letter signers, from what we understand. There's different estimates that we're getting from folks somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 MPs, perhaps more, got up and said it is time for the Prime Minister to go. There were others who stood up and defended the Prime Minister, although from what we're told, a smaller number. One MP said to me that the Prime Minister was told repeatedly, you are the problem. People don't want to hear from you anymore. And this MP said, you know, people pressing on that button over and over and over, it must have been bone shattering for the Prime Minister to hear. Now, we have heard generally that the conversation was respectful, but obviously a difficult one, and that when the meeting wrapped, Trudeau spoke again. He said he's going to reflect, he's going to listen, but his inclination is to stay.
Okay. Rosie, it's interesting that when I spoke to someone who said when Patrick Weiler got up and read out the letter, it was like the end of Scooby-Doo when the mask comes off. You see who's behind it all, right? It was that sort of a reveal for them. I mean, what is the Prime Minister's office saying now? What are his people saying now? What do you think they're going to do after they've been confronted with this today?
It's a little bit unclear at this stage. I would say the first thing is that there was some surprise at the number of people who were expressing frustrations. It is surprising to me that would have been a surprise, but nonetheless, that is the truth. I think that they were very hung up on the fact that the letter that circulated did not have names attached to it, because as you've been reporting, it wasn't clear that that was going to happen today. I think they took some comfort in that there are people still not willing to publicly say what they are willing to put on paper and demand on paper. It's not clear to me how or if they will respond by Monday. I suppose some sort of response is needed. But given that, as
this is so paid off corrupt media, some response is given. What's the point of having a deadline if there's not consequences? It's kind of like our laws right now. What's the point of having our laws if these rule breakers, the law breakers, in this case the Liberal government, there's no consequence for them? It's the same thing. There's no point to a deadline. So there will be consequences, but I don't think these Liberal MPs, the backbenchers who signed their name on this thing, they're not really saying what that is.
As Catherine rightly points out, this is a deadline as opposed to a clear threat or ultimatum. I think it is hard for the Prime Minister's office to respond, and hard to know how this group of people will respond too. If the Prime Minister comes back and says, I'm staying, and here are some of the things that we're willing to do, is that enough to convince these people to down tools? I honestly don't know. And from what you guys have been saying to me as well, it's very, very unclear what next steps are.
Well, in fact...
So let's just break this down right now. So what happens, I think, in my opinion, if Trudeau doesn't step down, because at this point, I don't think they'll take anything less, because he's a complete bonehead and he's run that party into the ground. They feel like they're losing their jobs because he's a bonehead. He's doubled the debt. He's increased poverty beyond belief. He's just a terrible Canadian. So they want him gone. They feel like that is the only option, and they're right. And I'll show you later, there's some polling numbers which are kind of interesting regarding that. But if we jump over to the House here, the seating plan, you can see down here, Liberal 153. So what these 24 backbenchers here who want Trudeau to step down, they have power over him, because they can do one of two things. They can either vote in a next non-confidence vote with the Conservatives, or they can abstain, which is not a vote, but that's also not a vote for the Liberals. So if we look at that, they have 153. If you minus 24, that brings you down to 129. Now, Jagmeet probably vote with Trudeau, so that brings it back up to 152. So say all 24, which maybe not be the case, but say all 24 vote with the Conservative, that makes 143. So that means if these 24 vote with a Conservative and the Bloc votes with a Conservative, that pushes it over the edge to 176 or something like that. That would oust Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. It would go to an election. So that basically means that the Conservatives only need the Bloc and these people. They don't need the NDP or Jagmeet anymore. So that's opening another door here to essentially get rid of the Liberal Party and go to election. Now, if it's only some of them that vote with the Conservatives, there's not much margin for error there. I think it's only 8. So you'd have to have at least 16 of these people vote with the Conservatives, with Poilievre and the Bloc, to get rid of Trudeau. Because I think we can just assume Jagmeet is going to keep supporting him. He wants that pension. He's so close now. It may come down to a couple, but once again, the independents, you've got 3 there that would vote with Trudeau, 1 with the Conservatives, and then the Green Party are probably going to vote with Trudeau because Elizabeth May, she's corrupt too. So you could potentially have another 5 that come from the Green and the Independent to support Trudeau. So I don't know, it'd be tight.
What we're hearing, David, is that they really have not decided that while they're asking the Prime Minister to reflect, the people behind this letter have some reflecting to do as well to decide how far they're willing to go. I know a lot of people were listening yesterday when Ken MacDonald was on this program and raised, the specter of a non-confidence motion. People are saying, wow, that's a nuclear option that really is not going to work for so many of us. But there are...
I don't know. I mean, if they want him gone, that's exactly what I was just talking about. Non-confidence. They can vote with the Conservatives to get rid of him.
There are other measures in between, right? Do they make their names public? Do they hold a news conference? Do they sit as independents? There's a lot of room to maneuver here. They are thinking about that while they are asking the Prime Minister to take this time and reflect.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think if he doesn't step down, they start voting with Poilievre. At least, I mean, they would want to stand in solidarity. So probably you'd think all of them, maybe not all of them, maybe they don't all have the courage to do that. But some of them will start. If anything, they'll just start abstaining from voting.
I mean, the letters, this letter with the signatures is sort of like this contract between the MPs to agree to work together towards the goal of forcing a change in leadership. That's sort of binding them together. And what was released to caucus is where the position eventually evolved to, because there was no October 28th date on the initial document that they were signing, as I understand it. Patrick Weiler just emailed me back as the guy who read this letter and got things going, says he's not going to comment on what is said in caucus as is confidential, other than to say that this is the most honest and frank caucus discussion that I have ever had. I think it's time for the Prime Minister and for caucus members to take some time to reflect on everything that was said in the 3+ hour meeting. Other people who spoke today, Sophie Chattel, the Quebec Liberal MP for Pontiac, part of the effort to collect signatures. She was one of the people, I'm told, getting people to sign the piece of paper at various points throughout the process. We heard from Ivan Baker in there today, or Yvonne Baker, excuse me, in there today apparently, and also people like George Chahal, Anthony Housefather. Less clear to me if they're signed on to that, because some people who signed the letter spoke, not everyone who signed the letter spoke, and people who didn't sign the letter spoke. So we're not really at a much greater path of clarity, are we?
This is the thing. We don't really know what the number is. It seems clear that there were people who spoke out who hadn't signed the letter, but given that caucus hasn't seen the signatures that go along with it, they don't really have a sense, I think, necessarily of what the level of support is. But my sense from speaking to people who were in that room is that it did surprise people. I mean, it feels like perhaps a more substantial number, given what they perceive as the combination of the two groups than they expect.
Yeah, so there could be not just 24, because there's already the 3 that have already spoken up there when it went on CTV and CBC or whatever to talk about this. So there's probably more than 30, because there's just 24 on that list, but there's that bunch that haven't signed that. I bet you there's some that are just too scared too. That's probably closer to 40.
There are people, though, I should say, who are supportive of the Prime Minister, who believe that this airing of grievances, as you said earlier today, was important, it was helpful, that it was healthy. They also believe now that it's over, because they still think that the majority of people largely, broadly support the Prime Minister, and they don't know where this goes next, for all the reasons that we've talked about, not only because they don't know their strategy, but because there isn't anyone else who's waiting in the wings to take over this job. I mean, there are people, they're just not ready to go right away.
And I think there's an interesting question about whether there is a path forward for the Prime Minister and the PMO here in trying to deal with some of the core issues still at this point. I mean, we talked a lot about it in the special earlier today, this question of ads against Pierre Poilievre, a timeline, an amount in an ad buy, because MPs have been hearing for what some say amounts to years that something is coming, right? So
ads, that's what, God, these guys don't get it. There's no amount of ads you can buy to win your support out of this hole. The Canadian public, we don't trust you guys. You're a bunch of liars. You pay off this media that we're watching here. You're stealing our money. There's scandal after scandal, dealing with the most recent of $400 million, let alone Christian Firth and the $50 million Arrive scam. Pick a scandal. There's too many to count. The trust is lost. The trust is so low. It's unbelievable that there's still 20% bunch of boneheads in Canada that still support these guys. If anything, the final 20% of Liberals should be supporting someone else, even if it's not the Conservative Jagmeet, the PPC, the Rhino Party, the Green Party, Independents. Why would anyone still support the Liberals is beyond me.
Right. It's interesting, Rosie. You hear some people say that they think it is over, because I think there's been an underestimating of either side of this. Like, I think people I've spoken with close to the Prime Minister and the PMO leading up to this thought the number was smaller than the 24, like 12 to 15 is what they thought. And the dissidents believed they had a much larger number, and we saw maybe a little bit that they may have had a better sense of the discontent with what played out in caucus today. But my sense from speaking to the people who marshaled the letter, they see today as the beginning of the process, not the end of the process. And once they get the answer by Monday, assuming the Prime Minister lives up to the deadline, because he did promise to reflect on it, there's a whole other series of decisions and individual actions that may have to be taken then, because there's no collective.
There's one action. He steps down. I don't know what else these people would want. They want Trudeau to come back and say, I hear you loud and clear, but I'm Captain Narcissist. Like, what else are they going to accept but him stepping down?
Ultimatum of do this or else. They're going to see what he says and then reconvene and figure out what they're going to do.
Yeah, and let's be clear, the most damaging outcome, if the Prime Minister is going to stay, and it certainly appears that that's where his head is still at, is that this group, or a smaller or a larger group, says, well, we're not going to stay in the party. Yeah. That then becomes a very public humiliation, a very clear sign of a divide, and no way to come back from that. It does not sound today like that is on the table either. So, but that's the kind of bar I think we would be looking for, either, as you said, the confidence vote issue or leaving caucus altogether. That would be the kind of thing I think that would force him to take action. And right now, I don't know that whether we're closer to that idea or not.
Yeah.
What a load of bull crap. Trudeau's got to go. Jumping over to this interview now on CBC, we got this guy on here, and he's pretty honest and straight with it. It's a nice change of scenery here on this network.
If after the past few days you think that rain perhaps could be coming to an end.
We're certainly closer to the end than the beginning, for sure. I would not advise Mr. Trudeau to be going and buying any green bananas. Things are looking bad for him at the moment, but he can play for time. There is no mechanism by which the rebel MPs can ditch him. But they can make his position increasingly unpleasant.
You know, he came out of that meeting today and said his party is strong and united. What did you make of that statement from the Prime Minister?
I immediately thought that the party is weak and divided. The last two by-elections in safe Liberal seats, or what should be safe Liberal seats, were lost. You have about half of the backbench rising up in rebellion against a sitting Prime Minister. And you have more bad news to come, I'm told. You have a petition circulating, and I hear talk about other things to come in the days ahead from the party. The Liberal Party of Canada is a machine for winning elections, and increasingly the people in that machine don't think that this guy can get it done for them.
Another way of saying it is the Liberal Party is great at manipulating people's emotions and taking advantage of them to get them to vote for them. The Liberals have always been great at that, but they've really been exposed for what they've been doing to the public, and they're not going to recover from this for a long time, if ever.
What do you think they are telling him privately right now, and do you think that they are urging him to stay on?
Well, I get two different messages from my Liberal sources. One camp is telling me that he's considering his position very carefully, and he knows that he's in a difficult spot. Another camp is saying they're in full bunker mode, trying to hunt down their enemies and solidify his position. I can't figure out which is right and which is wrong. And one thing about Justin Trudeau is that he is not somebody who gives a lot of clues by mistake. He is a very practiced performer in front of the cameras, very disciplined, and he's not going to let on his plans if it doesn't suit him to do so.
This guy's spot on. It comes down to, who he was raised by, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. The guy taught him all this stuff growing up, I'm sure. And he probably told him, like, son, never, let people know what you're thinking. Keep your hand close to your chest. Don't let people know your cards. I'm sure he's learned all the tactics of lying and deceit. Not to mention the guy is a drama teacher, was a drama teacher. He's quite literally an actor. We have an actor, a loser, and a complete failure running our country.
You have studied the people in his inner circle. You've studied the man. You've studied him as a politician. I wonder if you could tell me what you think he believes the way forward is, despite these polls, despite the fractures within his own caucus, that he can put all of that aside and move forward and perhaps win the next election, if that is what he's thinking right now.
Well, there's two ways that I look at this, a charitable way and an uncharitable way. The charitable way is he is a fighter. He is an extremely determined person, and would not have become prime minister if that was not the case. I mean, if you look at his career, he was a backbench member of parliament and a former high school teacher who managed to win a majority government. He has repeatedly fought his way through scandals. He has a profound belief in himself and belief that he knows the country and has good plans for it. That's the sort of charitable view. The uncharitable view is people who have worked with him find him narcissistic and suggest that he's kind of addicted to being in the spotlight. We see him, he has a long track record of being a sort of attention-seeking person, a bit of a ham actor. And that view would be that he doesn't want to step out of the spotlight.
That was such an honest depiction of Justin Trudeau, the ham actor. Something you just don't see on CBC here. So next jumping over to CTV here, they got Nick Nanos on here talking about some polling data. Just the idea of getting rid of Justin Trudeau has kind of riled up some of the dwindling Liberal supporters, or some of them maybe that are floating in the middle. There's a bunch of people who are floating in the middle. They don't know, I don't know, where Conservative or NDP, or they don't like any of them. They're Liberal is their diehard team, but they don't like Justin Trudeau. Numerous premiers and MPs have actually said this. They've had constituents tell them directly, I'm a diehard Liberal, but I can't vote for Trudeau. So just listen to this.
The trend, and we do weekly polls so we can capture the trend first. And what we're seeing is that the greater the speculation that Justin Trudeau might be stepping down as leader, the Liberal numbers are improving. The gap between the Conservatives and the Liberals are narrowing. So like 4 weeks ago, Pierre Poilievre had like a whopping 20-point advantage over the Liberals and the New Democrats. Fast forward now, and that's only a 14-point advantage.
That's a big difference.
I think, yeah, absolutely. And I think for a lot of Canadians, 4 months ago, it looks like this guy's staying. But fast forward to the last couple of days, and it looks like perhaps, and no one knows what will happen, but there's the potential that he may step down, and that perhaps there's some Canadians who are thinking about a Liberal Party not led by Justin Trudeau and are looking at the Liberals again.
That gives us...
Definitely not. I mean, I'm sure that's true because there's a bunch of boneheads in our country. Just based on the numbers, you still got 20% of people who think Trudeau's still the greatest thing since sliced bread. But one thing is for certain is if Trudeau stays in power, and I've seen multiple people leave this comment, it's easier for Poilievre to win. Poilievre knows how to destroy Trudeau. He's already done it. He did it today in the House Commons. He'll do it tomorrow. He'll do it next week. But if you bring in carbon tax Carney or that disaster of a human being, Christy Clark, then it just mixes things up. People suddenly feel revitalized. Oh, it's new. It's new. This person must be good. It's new. Look at her hair. Look at his hair. It makes it trickier for the Conservatives because now they need to start, working on their game plan against a new leader. We'll see what happens here, but I don't think Trudeau's stepping down. He's king narcissist. He wouldn't do that.
Some indication of why Conservatives are not thrilled at the thought of Justin Trudeau leaving. What is your overall impression, based on what you just laid out, of whether or not it would be a more permanent boost for the Liberals if he did?
Oh, I think it would be permanent. The reality is that, no party leader can win an election when their house is divided. Because the reality is that even if 20% of Liberal caucus members don't want Justin Trudeau to lead the party, it sends a message to Canadians. So, why should Canadians trust a party leader when their own party is divided on them? So, you know what, Vashi? The damage is done. Whether he stays or goes, the damage has been done just by these MPs posting this letter and now talking more openly about questioning his leadership.
I 100% agree. When you have that amount of people come out and say, this guy's got to go, we're all social creatures. We know what that means. Why would anyone vote for a team that's not even playing together? It's like having a soccer team and having a few of the players playing for the other team or deciding not to play. They're just standing on the sidelines. No one's going to cheer for that team because they're not united.
Let me ask you, because the pushback we get from kind of the people in and around the Prime Minister, or even publicly as you hear him sort of respond to questions about this isn't punching through, right? This is politics. You guys are consumed with politics. I've got other stuff to do. Is your sense that the prospect of the Prime Minister leaving has punched through to the general electorate?
Oh, absolutely. The fact of the matter is Justin Trudeau is the Prime Minister. He has been the Prime Minister since 2015. It would be a game changer for him not to be the leader of the Liberal Party. It doesn't mean that the Liberals are going to win the next election, but it changes the political landscape fundamentally. And, for Pierre Poilievre, he wants to probably run against Justin Trudeau. The Conservatives have built their whole strategy around that. And, if the Liberals embark on a leadership renewal or a change in leader, all the parties are going to have to retool their strategies.
And let me ask you.
You got a guy like carbon tax Carney who's way smarter than Trudeau, like night and day, and all of his experience and stuff. He can lean on that. Trudeau doesn't have any experience. He's just a rich kid. That's all he is with a name. His dad was Prime Minister. But carbon tax Carney, though, I think he would really struggle because he is carbon tax Carney for a reason. He wants carbon taxes everywhere, and we're all sick and tired of the carbon tax. Most Liberals, I think, are sick and tired of the carbon tax. So I don't know, unless he rebranded himself differently or something, I don't know if he would do too well. He doesn't have that name brand recognition across Canada either. If they brought in someone fresh, I don't know. I mean, it would be harder for Poilievre. Christy Clark, though, she's the person who quite literally destroyed the Liberal Party in British Columbia. There's no Liberal Party in British Columbia provincially. So anyone who doesn't pay attention to that stuff, there is no Liberal Party because of her. She's the one who destroyed it. She was so terrible for our province for the 6 or so years she was in power.
What if they don't? In the counter to that, in your sense of, if the Prime Minister instead goes back to caucus and says, look, here's my agenda moving forward, here's my proposition in the next election, and it includes, I don't know what the wholesale change is, but some kind of substantive change. I'm not talking about a few tweaks here and there, but something like, for example, getting rid of the carbon tax, or I'm not saying this would happen, but let's say that is, versus leaving the position. Can that kind of wholesale change with the same leader change the numbers for the Liberals, do you think?
It might change them a little bit, but I don't think they'll fundamentally change them. So, perhaps Justin Trudeau can talk about things that he hasn't delivered on, like electoral reform. It's probably something that he wants to do. It could be a big thing that would appeal to younger voters. But, the fact of the matter...
He talked about that on Nathan Erskine's Skin, the Liberal guy with the, whatever it's called, Uncommons podcast. And Trudeau said he really wanted to do it, and he already stated it's something they're not going to do. So I don't think he's just going to suddenly pull electoral reform out of his butt and say, we're doing it now. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, who knows? Maybe he'll pull any rabbit out of his hat to save his butt. Let's just talk real here. They should all be going to jail for stealing our money. Forget all this nonsense of who's the leader, this and that. We're talking about $400 million that they flushed into people's accounts. It's time to get the paddy wagons outside and put these people in jail for what they've done. Why are we even talking about all of this stuff?
There is that, if it looks like the same old party and it has the same old leader with the same old policies, we're probably looking at a result that will favor the Conservatives.
And just finally, one more question, because a large majority of the MPs who are in opposition to him staying on are from Atlantic Canada. There are other areas, a few from Quebec, a few from southwestern Ontario, but primarily from Atlantic Canada. What in the numbers explains that?
Well, when we look at our seat projections in Atlantic Canada, it's going to be a bloodbath for the Liberals in the current scenario. MPs like Dominic LeBlanc will probably hold on to his seat. It might be a seat in northern New Brunswick and Bathurst, a seat in Halifax. But beyond that, it's going to be thin gruel for the Liberals right now in this current configuration with Justin Trudeau as the leader and the current policies that they're in.
So it kind of explains, as my friend Rob Benzie calls it, the SOS campaign. Save our seats.
Panic, probably for Liberals.
SOS campaign. Just going back to the seating plan here, another interesting combination of numbers is if the 24 didn't vote with Trudeau, they voted with the Conservatives, and Jagmeet votes with the Conservatives, that would also topple the government as well. So, you'd add in the one from the Independent, that would put it over the top. So even if the Bloc didn't, not like Jagmeet's going to do that because he's pension. That's all he cares about. But there's multiple ways Trudeau gets tossed out here. Next up, heading over to CTV, we've got T1000 here interviewing this a conservative strategist. He's got some good points.
If Trudeau were to go, then what? Let's say, Jason, he decides to, leave in the next couple of weeks. I mean, doesn't that create a lot of problems for the Liberals? How do they elect a new leader and get ready for another election, which could happen in 5 or 6 months from now?
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend that's easy. He's been using that argument against them, I would say, for the better part of a couple of years now. And, as you got a minority, it's very difficult, right? We do know that some people are starting to peek their head up, right? Mark Carney is clearly angling a leadership race, as is Christy Clark. There's a couple others that are kicking the tires, a few cabinet ministers that have had to been told, cool it over the last little bit. And so there is, for Mr. Trudeau, that's the ultimate trump card is, well, wait a second, we're in a minority. I can't leave. If I leave, then the opposition will jump on this weakness that we've got in our party. The problem is the weakness is him. The weakness is the party. The weakness is the agenda that they're taking forward. And as I said earlier, it's baffling to me that this party just keeps coming back with their answer to everything is more of the same. And I think that Canadians are looking for anything. They liked Mr. Trudeau at one point. They're tired of him for sure. But I think anything other different than I'm just going to try a little bit harder to do the same things that I've been doing so far. But they just are not willing to change. Mr. Trudeau is one of the most stubborn, hard-headed guys. And most of the time that has worked well for him. It's really not working well for him right now.
Yeah, a couple of the other names being tossed around were Dominic LeBlanc and Champagne. Imagine Champagne, Francois-Philippe Champagne as Prime Minister. No thanks. Any of those people, they're all losers. We even had that guy from Toronto Star saying that Melanie Jolie just Just imagine her as prime minister.
What do you think is going to happen now? What are we going to see? Is this going? You talked about this being a phony war, but will the pressure now get ramped up on him in the weeks ahead? Like if MPs come out of there saying, he's not listening to us. He's surrounded by people who are telling him what he wants to hear. He's being stubborn. Now what?
There's going to be some leaks coming out in the next couple of weeks. I assume this is what usually happens, right? A bunch of the people who smiled into the cameras today and said we're all together are going to go call people like you, sadly, Todd, and say, maybe we're looking for some real action. He made some real promises. We're waiting for him to follow through on those things. He's clearly promised to shuffle the cabinet. I don't know what that's going to do, but that's what he's clearly promised to do, is shuffle the cabinet. And I think also he's promised to take the fight to Pierre. So I think what you should be expecting is there he is walking out of question period, looking just positively giddy. And so for a guy who went through a very difficult meeting, it looks like he thinks he's through it for sure. You can see from that sort of smug look on his face walking out of the meeting, he thinks he's through it and he's ready to roll. I do.
So someone who didn't look so happy coming out of that meeting, check out Sean Casey. He's right behind Dracula here. He scurries past, and the look on his face.
Thank you. The interest rates falling. Mr. Casey?
Clarify where. So this guy here, we'll make it big for you guys.
Nope.
Look at this. Can you clarify where you stand? Nope. This is a man who's like, I am tired of this party. He is out. He's checked out. If you wanted some honesty from what happened in that meeting, it's right here on his face.
Expect him to try to turn up the heat on the Conservatives a bit, because that's the one thing that he does have the ability to do, is to try to fight back. And he probably is their best version of that. So I expect that for sure. But listen, I think by Christmas, he'll be back ensconced as party leader. And I think a bunch of these rabble-rousers will be a little bit disappointed with the results, and they'll still be 20 points behind in the polls, and the Liberals will be saying more of the same. So again, this has been a couple of years of this, Todd.
I mean, that's if they choose to do nothing. Maybe they are kind of spineless and they don't, vote non-confidence, or they vote with the Conservatives. Who knows? Time will tell here. Let's see what the people have to say here. This is actually great news. Trudeau against Pierre Law. The Liberal Party will be extinct. We are sick of all the gaslighting from all the Liberals. If you watch that video, it's 46 minutes long. I'm not going to play it, but basically they asked all the Liberals. They all came out with the same canned answers. And Sean Casey was like one of the only ones who actually gave an honest facial expression and he refused to answer, right? Most of them had the canned, like, party solidarity. We're all good. We're strong. We're together. Just a bunch of bull crap. No one's surprised. He's modern day Nero, fiddling around while the country collapses. That cocky, narcissist little strut says it all. He either threatened them or has another nasty, evil scheme in his pocket. The fact that he loves being hated is terrifying. They all want their pension. That might just be it. The reason why these guys have supported him for so long. Even if they're a Liberal backbencher, they're making like $194,600, I believe. It's almost $200,000. Just think, the 10 years they've been sitting there doing that, that's $2 million. When you take off, say, half for taxes, it's $1 million in their pocket. Obviously, they've, spent money living life, but they would have hundreds of thousands of dollars plus a pension. And even some of I think Jagmeet's pension was set to be one of the lowest because he's not qualified yet, is like $34,000 a year. Imagine getting paid $34,000 a year and you have $1 million in the bank, or $800K in the bank or something. Like, these people are set. They can just go off into the sunset and just retire, because they've all bought houses before this. They probably had Trudeau telling them, go buy a house before I jack immigration. Papa's, gotta get paid. A lot of them probably bought houses. This is all by design. Trudeau's got a real estate development company. Not that we know that much about it, aside from that he sells lumber from there. Really, maybe that's all he promised these people, at least the caucus. And his ministers, it seems like he's promised them a lot more, not to mention they get paid an extra $100,000 a year. The ones who step forward as an independent and speak out will be hailed as true patriots at this point. I mean, a bunch of them, those 24, could sit as independents and distance themselves from the Liberals. That would send a message too. Finally, with this topic, I thought this was interesting what Nathan Erskine Smith here said. Just listen to his language, the way he's talking about this whole situation.
Colleagues, or is it that the Prime Minister needs to regain the trust of all of his caucus?
So my message today was twofold, actually. It was that I think the Prime Minister has to listen to the frustrations, and in some cases really valid frustrations, of caucus colleagues, and incorporate that into changes moving forward, whether those are big changes or small changes or both. And the second thing is, my colleagues need to turn the knives outwards and not inwards, and we need to focus on the most important thing, which is getting things done here in Parliament and taking the fight to Pierre Poilievre, because he's a disaster for this country.
And
So Pierre Poilievre is a disaster for the country, and it's important to point the knives outward. What kind of language you're a parliamentarian. Why would you talk about knives pointing outwards towards the enemy? Are you kidding me? Is anyone else find that kind of appalling? That's not the kind of language you should be using. What if some Liberal supporters decided to use knives tomorrow and go after Conservatives? How would you feel? People are very impressionable. You shouldn't use language like that, especially in the government, in Parliament. Criminals and illegal drug dealers love the Liberal Party of Canada. Liberals keep them in business. Might as well get want to be PM tatted on his forehead. Jumping over to my group, let's see what memes we've got today. Electric fire truck burns down brand new German fire station. Oh man, not starting good here. Police escorting fish poachers at Bowmanville Creek, Ontario. Wow, this is great to see. We don't need people taking advantage of our country. Like, learn the rules and play within them. This isn't India. You know, it's time to learn where you're living. Poachers. Oh, here's another one with that same thing. Here, we've actually got some shots of them poaching. Waiting since 67. Police pose with $900 worth of groceries stolen. How to make Canada great again. A coal-fired power plant in China's Sichuan province. China now emits more CO2 than the entire developed world combined, completely canceling out all the sacrifices you're being forced to make with the pursuit of net zero. If Guilbeault really wanted to fight climate change, he should maybe be looking at the amount of coal that Canada exports to China. We're like the top exporter of coal to China. Here's a graphic of it. Canada's largest export to China is coal. Asia switching for just 20% of its coal plants to Canadian LNG would eliminate equivalent of Canada's total emissions. Mark Carney says he plans to enter elected politics as Liberals begin to organize leadership bids. This slippery little rat just slithering around. There we have it. Justin Trudeau's on the ropes. So Monday, the 28th is when their deadline is. We'll see what that deadline really means. Does it mean they start voting not with him? Do they move over to be independents? Do they vote with the Conservatives? Or do they just do nothing and Trudeau just keeps running our country into the ground? We'll have to see. One thing's for sure, though. Trudeau was off his game in the House of Commons today, and Pierre Poilievre absolutely wiped the floor with him. At this point, one of these things is going to take down the government, whether it's the leadership bid or the $400 million they took from Canadians.